I'm going to show you how to optimize and maximize your nightly rates. I've found that there is one thing that's responsible for more than half of the money you make, and it's called market penetration index. Here's what I mean. So I think the best way to measure your performance as a short-term rental operator is against the market. So if we have, 500 competitors in this market that you're competing with, right? You got a 5-bedroom house with a pool, okay? Let's say there's 500 other five-bedroom homes with a pool in your market. That's your competition. And if on a given month, let's say they make 10K, is what the market makes, right? On average. They make 10K on average, and that same month, let's call this particular month, let's call it June, okay? And that same month you make 20K. You just did 2x the market, okay? Now, not all 2 months are created equal, right? So in Las Vegas last year, February, the Super Bowl was held. And it was probably a record month for just about every short-term rental operator there. Following year, February, you didn't make the same amount of money. You can't really compare year over year. You can't compare any one weekend to the next because there's just different things. There's different draws to town. Yeah, maybe if there's some big event that happens every year, then you can do some comparison. But the market dynamics have probably changed in the last year. So really just comparing yourself to the market is, I think, the simplest and best way to evaluate your performance as an operator in terms of how much revenue you're making. And so then what explains RAM, what I like to call revenue against the market, what explains it the most? What is the one thing that does the most to explain and determine the amount of revenue against the market you generate? And what I have found is that it is your market penetration index. This is the amount of occupancy you have relative to the competition. So just like I showed you with RAM. All right, let's say that same month, right, June, that the competition made 10K. Let's say that the average occupancy was 50% for the market, okay? And you did 75% occupancy that month, all right? So your MPI is 1.5. 1.5 times the market equals your occupancy 70%. That is your market penetration index, or MPI. And if you correlate MPI, and correlation is a mathematical function, okay? And so if you correlate MPI and RAM, it turns out that MPI, based on the mathematical function that is correlation, explains 50% of RAM in just about every case, in every market, and every property I have tested this with. Correlation is not causation. I get it, but stick with me here. Now, it explains half. And logically, it makes sense. The more occupied you are, the more bookings you're getting, the more money you should make, but it is not linear. I'll dive into that in a minute. That said, caveat, that means there's like a whole bunch of other things that also explain your revenue against the market, okay? It is your history of reviews is a big one, all right? The amenities you offer, how good your photographs are. There are so many things, there's so many variables that determine your earnings potential as a short-term rental operator. But again, there is not any one thing that correlates 50% like MPI does. So we pay special attention to it. When you're doing everything else right, you're getting good reviews, you're treating guests well, you're providing exceptional experiences. A lot of things revolve around how well you treat guests and how good of a time they have at your property, right? Surprise, surprise. But you're doing all that right. Now you can really start to optimize your pricing, okay? And it's key. You have everything else going right. Now you can leverage some mathematics to get to optimal pricing. Here's how we do it. If you were to put RAM, revenue against market, MPI, on an XY axis, this is generally true. Here's what you find. If you have zero occupancy, you charge $1 million a night, you will have zero occupancy, right? There's no property that can do that. You also have zero revenue. Zero occupancy, zero revenue. Zero occupancy against the market, MPI, zero times market average occupancy is zero, right? We'll get you zero RAM. Let's say that you have 3x market occupancy, right? You are charging $1 a night. You will be 100% booked, and your revenue against the market will also be close to zero. Okay, and your occupancy could be, let's call it 3x the market, all right, 3.0. The average market is 33% occupied, you're 100%, 3x MPI, 3 MPI. You're also close to zero at this price point, okay? But there's some amount of MPI, let's call it 1, that gets you some corresponding amount of RAM, okay? And then what we've seen is that when you tick up, let's go to 1.5, RAM tends to tick up too. 1.7, all right, let's get over here now. And this continues to a point and then goes back down to 0, all right? This is called a parabola. There it is. And so when you have a bunch of, in reality, it looks a lot like this, right? You've got all these points here. And with this, you can extrapolate what's called a parabola of best fit. Because in reality, which is a little bit messier than theory, it doesn't actually look nice and pretty like this, right? Again, it looks more like this. When you start plotting this, you're going through the months, you're comparing yourself to the market. It looks more like this. You can't draw a straight or even curved linear line through it. But what you can do is figure out the parabola of best fit, which means the parabola that has the least amount of distance from the line, from the curved linear line, to all the actual points that occurred in reality, right? Whatever parabola, by the way, parabola equation is y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. Everyone probably has heard that equation at one point in your life. This is why you should have paid attention in math class. Whoa! All right, anyways, back to how we operationalize this, okay? So you create the parabola of best fit. Again, it's a parabola, it's this is the definition of a parabola in mathematical terms. It is the line, right, that creates, it's, the constants, the A, B, and C. It's really what you're figuring out, A, B, and C constants. Which set of A, B, and C constants produce a curved parabola, curved linear line, right? Curved line that reduces the distance to the lowest amount possible between all of the known points that occurred in reality. It's not this line, it is not this one, it's this one, okay? And so once we have the line of best fit, the parabola of best fit, we can identify the peak and we can say, aha, this is optimal market penetration index, which is something that we can control more than just about anything else, right? You want 0 occupancy, charge too much. You want 100% occupancy, charge too little. You want to increase occupancy, lower prices, right? You want to decrease occupancy because you've gone too far to the right, you're somewhere around here, raise prices. Your occupancy will go down, right? You can look into the future and do this. You can look 5 months ahead and see, we are 5% occupied for the month of 6 months ahead, and the market is at 10% occupancy. We want to be 1.2. We need to lower prices, right? We want to be 12% occupied because the market's at 10 and we want to be 1.2. That's our optimal MPI, lower prices. Or you're at 20% occupancy when the market's at 10. Increase prices. It's literally that simple, right? I take that back. It's a little bit more complex when you put this into practice. You gotta be able to identify that and how much of an adjustment do I make to my pricing to get back to optimal, MPI, which would be a whole different video and a rabbit hole to go down. But in general, we find this to be true. It seems to work. Our properties on average do about double what the market is doing, right? So we consistently beat them. And with individual properties, we consistently beat them by a certain amount. And our strategy revolves around this theory. So it does seem to be working in practice. So we practice this with a combination of Excel spreadsheets and price slabs. There's so many levers in price slabs. We play with all of them. We don't do the set it and forget it version that most people do. We adjust it all the time based on our understanding of the market that we develop in Excel. And then, so we're kind of interplaying the two all the time together. And we also give away our Excel sheets for free. So if you want them, hit me up, comment, they're yours. You can have them. They're pretty well built out and we're always improving them. So you can always get the best version if you go to our website. Hope that helps. Hope you take it and run with it, and happy short-term renting.